Yesterday, I heard the Minister for Energy appeal to Ghanaians to bear with him as the new tariffs are applied from tomorrow. And he said a couple of things. He said Ghana now has a net demand supply situation. So he says we are generating as much as we need. So we need more generation. He also said we cannot get a doomsday timetable because the power outages are happening at different places at different times, and it happens, and then they get to know and they deal with it. So that's one issue. Now, the other problem is that there are many challenges with local areas that are making people frustrated. So 3 days ago, when it rained, some places had power outages because some cables had fallen or whatever. People didn't have power. It took a while for ECG to repair this. Then this past 3 days, people have been sending us messages about, oh, my transformer has blown. When I call ECG, they don't respond. Yeah. Something is burning. So the customer service problems of ECG is sort of worsening people's power experience. Yeah. And at the same time, you want to increase power. In fact, last week, some people kept sending me a message that I should discuss doomsday because they believe there's doomsday. So on Friday, we spoke about it. And we got calls from everywhere. Wow. That their power goes off, it comes back, goes off. So I think we need some answers from the power distribution company in terms of what the situation is with why lights go off in specific places, and whether they need to also beef up their customer service response system. True. You know, because I mean, something happened on 23rd April. As of this morning, before this lady was able to get in touch with ECG to finally go and deal with the matter. And as I speak to you, somebody says he's been trying to deal with ECG for the past 10 days on a transformer situation. You get it? So, and I'm bringing all these things because there's also a bigger conversation about the government's almost uncertainty in privatizing ECG. If you recall, when President Mahama won the election, a few people visited his office. Within that week, there was a discussion about power. Yeah. There was a committee he met, which had the current minister, and then the whole indication was that ECG would be privatized. Now, I am worried a bit about that because, and let me explain myself, then you can come. This is even before the man has taken office. Okay, so I get the impression that some people who have an interest in privatizing ECG basically jump-started the conversation. Because if you come into office, you are supposed to assess the situation. Do you understand me? And then make a decision for yourself. But if you like, go on citynewsroom.com and Google ECG Mahama from December 7, December 8, December 9, December 10. He said ECG will be privatized. Jinapo, who was not yet minister, said ECG will be privatized. And all of this was said after some meetings were held. So I have the view that maybe some of these challenges are being, I don't want to say engineered, but there's a part of me that believes that it's like, okay. And in fact, 2 days ago, the IMF guy who's been coming to Ghana, Rude, he said, oh, ECG is the weakest link in Ghana's financial sector. Atufosin said the same thing. Now, look, I'm not here to defend
the power sector.
Yeah, power sector. No, but there were two. So they said power sector is the risk to our economic thing, and then ECG is the weakest link in the power sector. Now, I am not here to defend inefficiency, but I believe that there has to be a more thorough discussion about this privatization business. It seems hurried, in my view, and it seems orchestrated with the greatest of respect. Because why should we be making statements about privatizing ECG even before ministers are sworn in?
Are you sure it's not?
And then a committee was put in place to go and come up with the modalities. You see, because Sky, ECG has a bad name, but privatization may not be the solution. Do you know where I'm going here? So I feel like we need to have a more proper discussion. The committee should come and tell us, this is the problem we saw. This is why we believe only privatization can solve it. Do you see where I'm coming? It seems some way.
It would seem that the question of privatization or the role of the private sector in power distribution is one that has been prompted to a large extent by external sources. Because if you remember...
Thank you very much.
What did he say?
External influence
That's what I was hinting
You
at.
finish.
But you have said it with more.
Be trouble.
You also believe that?
No, it's a fact.
Okay. Okay, but Sky, you continue. Sky,
Yeah,
please. Sky.
so you see, so you saw the embarrassment that the previous administration suffered, for instance, when what's the name of that company? It was a PDS deal. Became a whole scandal that the government couldn't eventually deal with. So eventually they had to abrogate the transaction and had to move on, which also meant that at some point the Americans were not, for instance, happy with us. So what ordinarily should have been part of an allocation they were ready to make to us in terms of financial support, so that we can sort out some of the problems within the energy sector, the power distribution sector, they withheld that. And from what we hear, the NDC now in office wants to, as much as possible, unlock that. And also saw an opportunity to allow persons who are, vested in the system or invested in the system in one way or the other to also have a share of the cake. So don't be surprised if we have PDS 2.0.
Wait, is the compact still available? Because the PDS was based on the Obama compact on power sector, which we saw its benefits.
Yeah.
And there was a process for which that should have happened. And it got messed up. Are you suggesting that these external influences could also engineer some sort of... Because what the compact does is that it gives you money to do some investment. And then it sort of justifies the private ownership. Do you foresee any type of arrangement like this? Or this is purely...
The Americans withheld some of the allocations to us. In fact, if you go on the net right now, you Google that, you notice that the Americans suspended further work on further releases to us because they had felt that there were certain obligations we could not live up to under the compact. And therefore, they said, no way, we are not going to make further releases to you.
Yes.
The NDC campaign on that vigorously around the country. And in fact,
this was the first term of Akufo-Addo, right?
Yeah, that's right. They were very critical of the government, the spokesperson in Parliament, and they made it clear that when they came, they were going to work very hard to unlock what was left.
But if that is true, then Sammens, you can't say that it's just external, because it means that NDC has been consistent that they believe the compact should have gone a certain way and the privatization should have happened anyway. So they were not against PDS. They were not against privatization. They were against the way it was done, right?
They were against the PDS in S4.
The way it was done.
Exactly.
But not against the idea of private sector
participation. That was open for discussion.
Which is what I'm saying now. So which means that the party...
I think you are mixing a few things together.
Help me here.
You just used the phrase private sector participation.
Yes.
And indeed, ECG in its present form, within that space, has a lot of private sector participation.
Okay.
So that's no question. We are talking about the ownership of ECG. That's where we part company. That you can't wake up without solving the emerging problems of ECG, jump into a conclusion that only the selling of ECG to a private company will solve your problem. That's an illusion. You can't talk like that.
They are jumping too quickly.
They're jumping too quickly. And I'll tell you why. You see, you talked about doomsday timetable. Now, the emergence of doomsday timetable was to solve a problem of transmission. Sorry.
Generation.
Sorry. Generation.
Yes.
Okay. Now we've gone past the generation problem largely. We are at the transmission problem. And the emerging problems are as a result of technical problems and the use of obsolete equipment, which you can't predetermine. So if there's no doomsday timetable, fair enough. But the speed with which we attend to the emerging problems is of the essence. Now, how are we going to do that? You have those in the supply of cables. And I'm talking about large cables and electrical wiring and all these things, which are inputs to the job that ECG does. Local content. Let's go and evaluate the participation of the local companies in this subsector of ECG's operation. You have Nexans cable metal, you have railway cables, you have tropical cable and conductors. These are the bigger companies. Go and check how much the government owes them.
Too much money.
Go and check how much we owe them. And then we go and buy containers of this same product from external markets, put jobs on their tables, and then when we finish, we say to ourselves that before the thing works, we have to privatize the ECG. Are we okay?
Hold on. Was it not ECG who went to buy those things?
No, I'm coming. But the policy direction is what they will follow. Okay. What I'm saying is that you have some of these are companies, Ghanaian companies owned by Ghanaians, producing in Ghana, employing Ghanaians. We have tied their feet and tied their hands, and we're asking them to run. How does that happen? And then we also tell ourselves that no, we have a big problem. In order for us to solve the problem, we should sell ECG. You want to sell ECG when you have not solved this supply problem of cables? Let's move from cables. Go, you see meters and you see transformers. You have local manufacturers of meters and transformers. You have companies like Alpha TND Limited, you have Westrafo, you have Ghana Electrometer. All these companies are indigenous companies. Go and see how much money we owe them.
A lot.
And then we were not thinking about empowering local industries. We are thinking about now those of you in banking and finance, think about this thing. ECG is one of the most debt-ridden companies we have in Ghana. And yet, politicians tell us that is the most attractive company that private sector people would want. Check.
Let's take it one by one. You're saying that if the financial situation of ECG is that bad, it should not be something that
the low-hanging fruit for private
people should be eager
exactly
to take. Okay, let me...
And before I go on, and also know that the ECG suppliers themselves, they have bent their fingers with all the local banks. I'm telling you, because they take money, they can pay back.
Yeah,
because ECG will not pay.
Not
And you think that when you bring a company from America or something, they will come with their own bank?
When you say that there's already private sector involvement, you need to break it down because
I just did.
In the supply.
Yes.
Okay. You see, what I saw of the terms of reference was for the committee to look into how private sector can participate in the value chain and also in the running of the company. Now, so you are talking about supply of goods can be done by a private company.
No, they are being
done already.
Already.
Yeah. So if that's the case, then it means that the mandate of the committee is beyond that. Is to go and look at ownership, equity, management. Do you understand me?
And I'm saying that about 80% of ECG's problems are financial and within the supply chain space.
So you don't see the point. So it's not a management problem.
It can be a management problem, I agree, but it's also policy direction problem.
But the policymaker is blaming the implementing company for inefficiency. So, for example, yesterday, the minister spoke about ECG running deficit of 1 billion cedis every month. Let me read that story for you. Actually, this is April 3, before yesterday. So, and again, I'm putting two and two together. The rhetoric of the minister suggests, so let me read it. Ghana's power distribution sector incurs a monthly deficit of over 1 billion cedis, a situation that is straining the entire power value chain and necessitating urgent reforms. Minister for Energy and Green Transition, Junapo, has stressed the need for private sector participation to enhance efficiency and financial stability of ECG. Let me finish. Quote, today as we speak to you, on a monthly basis, we incur a deficit of or a shortfall of more than 1 billion cedis from the distribution sector. And this has a cascading effect on the rest of the power sector players.
Why?
Clearly, something must be done, he said.
Why?
He explained that the government is committed to reforming the sector through PSP, improving revenue collection, and increasing of our efficiency. So the suggestion is that the management of the company is not making it operationally efficient and financially sustainable.
What are the key losses that ECG records?
they give us a breakdown in the KPMG report. So there's the technical, there's the commercial, and then they put that together, quite a large one.
So when it's technical, it means that you are using...
So there's engineering losses. So the power is unaccounted for, and then the money is unaccounted for.
And then people are stealing the power.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes.
So what would a management that is alive to its responsibilities do about that? First, you invest in overhauling the entire system to ensure that if X amount of power is produced, at least something close to 80% or so is properly accounted for, right? But what have we seen? We were told that containers were imported into this country.
Yeah.
Some of those containers were supposed to go into what? Overhauling the system. For some reason, we can't trace them. That's one problem.
They couldn't clear the containers first, and then it got disappeared.
I mean, how can GPHA is owned by the government?
Yes.
We, the people of Ghana, own it, right?
There's also MPS.
Exactly.
They own a lot of it. You don't own that much, actually. You don't own that much.
No, to a large extent. And in fact, they work with electricity there. So what stops the management from thinking outside the box and saying that, okay, well, we will owe you X amount in import duty, so we can offset that. Sometimes we do that here a lot, right? Against whatever taxes that we are liable for, so that you don't allow the containers to sit there at the port, incur demurrage, and gives people the opportunity to sell it off just to make some money out of it. So that is one way of...
Could this have happened if the management of the company were private? The kind of things you just described in the cable sector and the kind of things you just described at the port. If a private person were running ECG, would this...
The fact that
yes and no.
Yeah.
Explain.
It could be... is this the case that every government organization that has been privatized has suddenly become profitable? And we know the answer. The answer is no. But what I'm saying is that you can't jump... I'm not against privatization. I'm saying that the due diligence, operational due diligence we have to do to even get there, we have not touched it.
To be fair, the committee has presented a report, but it has not been made public.
The report is to the minister, not us.
Yeah,
we are
I'm
commenting based on what we know.
What is in the public?
I'm saying that what I'm saying is that the question you are asking is a legitimate question. The answer to that question has to be in the report.
But we need to know.
Hold on. So the purpose for the program is for the gap in that jam to be filled. So they have to put the report out.
Bernard,
so that we can...
Anything that comes out of the report that concludes that we need to sell ECG is fraudulent.
Even no. I won't take that. I think what you need to say is that you want to see how the committee arrive at its conclusions.
But that one we have no choice.
No, if the committee, if the way they are, because you've built a point, if the way they arrive at that conclusion is acceptable, then you can agree with the conclusion.
I get the academic logic.
No, it's not academic.
No.
You can't jump in.
Academic, not in book. I'm just saying that the logic of what you're saying. But I'm also saying that based on what I know, and I'm not talking about my opinion. I'm talking based on what
I know.
I am telling you that if we don't resolve the supply chain, the private participation issues in the supply chain, and I repeat, private participation within the supply chain, if we don't resolve that and we stick to this approach of Sky was making a point. Okay, how do we sustain the operations of ECG first and foremost without revenue generation? Now, how do you generate revenue if your billing and your collection is defective? Billing and you can have the biggest capacity. If your billing and collection is defective, you are crippled. Now, how come even in the use of meters, we have different standards in use? And that's where I come with the policy direction. Why can't you have companies in Ghana producing meters? You have Ghana Standards Authority sitting here regulated. You mean that we cannot standardize metering, and then we buy some from Hong Kong? We buy this. This is our man, so let him also supply some, and then we bring the thing, and there's no synchronization.
To be fair, in response to that, when you read what I just read, Jinapo explained that the government is committed to reforming the sector through PSP, improving revenue collection, which you just mentioned.
That's what they always read.
And increasing of our efficiency. No, hold on. You see, we are taking it one by one. If privatization means that bringing a solution that synchronizes the metering and makes revenue collection more efficient.
What
That does not necessarily have to mean that overall management of the company
what
is
was the
sold.
reason for bringing PDS?
No, let's not go there. I'm talking about where we are now. You see, he's making a point. You spoke about revenue
Yes.
and losses, and he also spoke about the metering and the confusion there.
Billing and collection.
Good. So billing. Now my point is that they keep using the word PSP. So if they get a private sector participant whose job it is to say, okay, we will have a metering system or a billing system that can synchronize all the meters, or we will have a solution where the need for different types of meters is
Hold
reduced.
on right there. Let me ask this question before you continue. Now, if you get that private sector participant, how are you sure that he is going to purchase meters from local manufacturers?
You can use policy direction to guide that.
So why aren't you using the policy direction now? While you are in control,
But
you are
wait,
buying
but is
meters
there- but is there-
from a queer place in
But
China.
is there local capacity for
They're
meters?
local producers.
No, let's don't.
I can't answer that question, but we have to make sure that we optimize what we have locally,
So-
which I know for a fact that we haven't done.
You mentioned that hold on.
Let
You
me
mentioned
just-
hold on.
let
You
me just
mentioned
add
that
something was
Bajiri, you said you mentioned that in the cabling. I can't argue with you because you've mentioned the companies. So Nexans and all these guys are there. So there's no sense in going to procure so much cables and wires from abroad when the companies are here to do it.
Yeah.
Nobody can argue with that. But on the metering and the billing,
Well, I mentioned the companies too.
Yeah.
on the metering,
Yeah, local companies that
I
produce
mentioned-
the
are they able to?
They
But
are and good quality, and in fact, some of them are even exporting to other countries.
The issue is that if you pay them on time,
They will do it.
then they will be in a position to scale up.
So your point is
But
that
you
if you
give
haven't
them,
exhausted,
no, some of these companies have not been paid in some cases for 5 years.
so if you haven't
6
exhausted,
years, 7
if
years.
you haven't exhausted the local, okay. Good. The next question: How do we know that the local meters are better?
They are standards. They are
Okay.
industry standards.
Good.
And Bernard, guess what? If you like, I'll dare you, go and check the most frequently defective meters and check where they are coming from.
There was a group of meters that for some time had a problem. I think they had, I won't mention the name on air, and they tried to phase it out. I used to have some. There was a problem with that was like 6 years ago.
Go and check.
So let me
You
come
have
back to point.
meters, the firmware in the meters,
Yeah.
you can't touch it in Ghana unless you travel and bring somebody to come and fix it. Are we okay? When we have IT companies all over the place.
So let me go back
No.
to let me go back to the two of you. So the two of you are saying that first, private sector participation is a big expression. There are already private sector participation in ECG
Heavily.
in the supply chain.
Yes.
So that should not be thrown away. Number two, whatever the government wants to do with ECG by way of private sector participation, if it means selling or handing over the assets and liabilities of ECG to a private company which is foreign, willy-nilly, that's the word Sky uses, you disagree. You are prepared to consider private sector participation if it has to do with billing and metering to the extent that locals are prioritized. I'm trying to summarize your argument. That's number three. But all of this you've said with the caveat that you are still willing to read the full report of the committee, which has not been made public.
Of course.
Which I think for public policy purposes, they should not treat like the MPP report.
It's another
They have to make it. Now, I want you to listen to two things. The technical committee tasked with advising the government on private sector participation, and this is 2nd April, of the company, submitted this report to the Minister of Energy and Green Transition, John Jinapo, on the 2nd of April. The report outlines 3 key recommendations: entity concession, multiple lease, and service franchise, which the committee believes will help address challenges facing the ECG. Committee Chairman Jabesh Misata discussed these proposals during an engagement with the minister. After that, you hear Minister Jinapo reiterating that ECG will not be sold in that conference. So I want you to hear the two, then we proceed. So this is Jabesh Misata speaking when he gave the report to the minister.
9 major challenges that are impeding the performance of distribution utilities in the country. And these 9 have been put in 4 groups. The first group has to do with the administrative setup of ECG especially. And we see problems with governance, we see problems with management malaise. And then we also see procurement problems. This is not because of what has come up in the past week, but we had identified it previously. Apart from these, then there are also operational issues that are impeding the performance of this distribution function. And these include the high losses, both in terms of commercial and collection, and high losses in terms of technical and unaccounted energy. Then lastly, there's widespread customer dissatisfaction with the services they are receiving from the distribution utilities. Overall, we looked about eight models of private sector participation, and we settled on 3 to that summarize what the picture is. And we have looked at this in detail. There's one that we call, the first one, option A, that we call the entity concession, where the whole distribution business would be given out to a private concession as one whole concession. Then there's option B, which we are calling the multiple lease, in which case the distribution across the country will be divided into several parts, and each of them awarded to probably a different private sector participator to operate and to invest in. Then there's a third option, which we call option C, the service franchise, in which case the private sector will operate the network, the low voltage network from the distribution transformer to deliver services to the homes.
Exercise is not the end of the road. In fact, this is the beginning. Because we thought that before we undertake or pursue this step, we needed to consult broadly. And so this is exactly what the committee has done. And as you just heard from the chairman, they've given us 3 options. Option 1, option 2, option 3. And in all the 3 options, it's quite clear that none of them talks about outright sale of ECG and its assets. And so I just thought that I should make it clear so that nobody goes to misquote us or misrepresent us to say that the committee has recommended that ECG be sold. In all the suggestions and the options, it's quite obvious that ECG will still remain the asset owner. And then, depending on which one we choose, we'll make progress. The next step from here will be to do a position paper to cabinet for the entire government to consider and approve the option that we will be pursuing, following which we would establish a project implementation committee. We would also have to get a transaction advisor, make this process as transparent and open as possible, with emphasis on local content and participation. On a monthly basis, we incur a deficit or a shortfall of more than 1 billion cedis from the distribution sector, and that has a cascading effect on the rest of the power sector players. And so clearly, something must be done.
So that was Minister Jinapo speaking after receiving the report. This is a month ago. So I believe the position paper is being put together for cabinet. And I think this is the time for the public to also be involved, because the committee has done their job, their technical committee, 3 proposals. There has to be vigorous policy analysis.
And ventilation of
it should not just be workers saying we don't agree and people saying we agree. It should be, I think, entity concession, multiple lease, and service franchise. Those 3 options.
What do those mean?
I'm coming. You are a lawyer. You should tell me. I shouldn't be. You should be telling me. I shouldn't be telling you. So what I'm saying is that there has to be a vigorous discussion and understanding of these matters. For which, because it shouldn't just be people have sat in some room, done a report, given it to a minister, they've got a position paper, send it to cabinet approves. That defeats public policy. ECG. Now, why am I doing this? This morning at 12:22 a.m., somebody sending me a complaint about ECG. My phone is always full of ECG complaints. ECG is a national company that has many touch points. a discussion on its future should not just be done by a technical committee. We do know that there are people who are trained to do this, but I also know that there are interests who have their own agenda. And therefore, there must be a reasoned public discourse on the issue. So we welcome the minister. Anytime he wants to come and talk about it, we are here. We welcome the committee members. Anytime they want to do an interview, we are here. But we are going to very carefully scrutinize the various options to make sure that the right thing for the greater good is done for the public based on the knowledge we have. So I want to wrap up here by asking Caleb to read a few comments on this before I move to my next issue. I'm going to do thank you, Tor stroke.
Charlie, quick one. We are told the reports are that Kennedy has
yes, so my reporter is there. So I'm going to go to Hafiz to speak after the stabbing of the guy. So there was a stabbing issue. So I went shortly, but I need to take a break.
Yeah.
So maybe let's take the break rather. Let's take the break.
Or we take the comment before the break.
Okay, comments before the break. Caleb.
Very quick one. Good morning, Bernard and team. I live at Pukwasi Maira, and we also have issues with our transformer. Due to the faulty transformer, we experience high and low voltages every day, especially after 6 p.m. It's as if we are living in a disco. We have been in this country where irregular power fluctuation has caused our homes to burn. I have reported this at ECG, but there is no action. They are waiting until something serious happens. Please ask them what it takes to replace a transformer. I worked with ECG for a while. I know ECG very well. Their largest wahala is one directly linked to integrity. The theft at all levels is staggering. If you knew the number of homes, businesses, churches, etc. using power for free and stealing, you would drop dead in an instant. EO in Shai Hill send that through. We live in a country where reporting my issue of 4-hour power outage seems very silly because people are having a whole week with no lights. We are so back in development. When power will Africa rise? Will it happen? You didn't add your name. But what discussions again about privatization of ECG do you want to hear? Privatize it immediately. Haba. Cyril from Kaswa send that through. And there's another one linked to telco.
We'll take a short break. We'll come back to deal with. And by the way, the ECG discussion is not just for today. We have many days. We have time. So we are not going anywhere.